This conference will now be recorded.
Thank everybody for tuning in and signing up for us. We really appreciate all. I really got to thank a few people that I really couldn't do all this by myself. I've got a number of people that have sent me information and pictures, and I know I'm a pain in the butt for a couple people. I keep calling and asking questions and so forth, but it takes more than one person to put something together like this, and I really appreciate all the help I get. And I've got three really great Corvette collections around Fort Wayne, Indiana that pretty much let me in anytime I wanted to come in and look. Larry Garrick opens his doors to me anytime I want to go up, and Sean Saracen takes care of Keith Bussey's collection and gets me in there anytime I want. And the late Ed Foss, I had pretty much run of that collection anytime I wanted to go up there, and I can't say enough for them people letting me in, getting pictures. Thank you everybody for joining in and any contribution you've made to me on these. As Nick said, I'm co-chairman for Heart of Ohio. I do the events. We do have a chapter judging meet coming up April 2nd that we could use to anybody that can make it there to judge. We would appreciate your help. I'm also the chapter chairman for the Indiana chapter here, and we have a regional coming up the end of April in Auburn, Indiana. It's the 28th through the 30th. If anybody attends that, stop and say hi to me on the way by. Really appreciate seeing you all there. I'll quit talking and get going here in the frames. We'll start off the 53 frame section here. I want to point out a couple things here on this. You see this arrow up here points, it shows the fuel lines and the brake lines on the outside of the frame rail down the passenger side. And 53s and early 54s, the VIN number was stamped in this area here and also in this area here. I've got some better pictures of this later on. After 54 through, or first part of 54 through 62, the frame stamp was about in this area here. The 6-cylinder cars, you'll notice up in this area, the amounts for the engine was welded on the frame kind of back here on the curved part. Later on for the V8s, it was moved forward quite a bit. This is a later V8 frame, and you can see the engine mounts are clear up here, and there's an indentation on the passenger side here for the fuel pump on the V8 cars. Here's the stamps on a 53. You can see the stamp on the X brace here was kind of crossed, and it was with the frame on the upright by the rear axle area. This frame's a little later. It's a 54, and you can see over here, this is where they moved the frame stamp to in that area. Looks like Bubba had worked on this and put a electric fuel pump on this car at one time. The frames from 53 through 62 were all made at the A.O. Smith plant in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. In 53, the stencil, actually all C-1s, the stencil is on the driver's side underneath the driver's door, about at where the X brace is in the center of the car. It's in red. Later on, it can kind of turn to a red-orange in the later cars. The 53, you can see right here. I got better pictures of this here later on, but the amount for the rear springs welded to the frame originally was just this piece up and down. They had some issues and they added this piece on. It's welded on later on. It's not at the factory weld on till later on in the run of the C1s. Very early 53s, they judging manual says to about serial number 50, they added these what they call tie down loops just in back of the rear axle right here. I actually seen car 68, it still had the loop on. I've seen 72 and the loop was not on that car. So I'm not going to tell you every car from 50 to 70 had loops. They could have been periodic on and off, but if you see a loop on car up to about 70, I would not question it, from what I've seen in the past anyway. You can see here, you can see the bumper welded on the side of the frame, and here is the bracket for the straps on the welded to the frame in the back there. Here is up in the area around the front. You can see the motor mount here back on the curved part. The frame, there's no indentation on this. This particular car is a 53. You can tell because the fuel filter's not by the fuel pump. It's up in front of the carburetors on the driver's side, and there's no X brace on the vent tube. The rear spring hanger here, it just bolts to that bracket I showed you earlier. And here's a better picture of that bracket. You can see the original bracket here, right? It cut off right in here, and then this piece was added on for a gusset to help support the rear spring hanger to keep it from breaking off. And the pin that goes through, if you ever look at an original one, it will have kind of a waffle pattern on the head. It's very hard to get a picture of that because it's right close to the frame, but you can kind of see the waffle pattern on the edge of that. Here's a later one, later frame hanger bracket. You can see it's kind of formed here, and they added this piece in. This particular one, I think, is on a 54, if I remember right where I got this one. You can see it's welded clear down. The earlier 53s had a slot right in here that the fuel lines and the brake lines went through. Here's the fuel line and the brake line running down the outside, and you can see that it looks like it's going right through the bracket here welded on. Just another angle of the lines running down the outside of the frame rails. You can see the difference, or the 53 on the right hand side and the 54, and you can see it goes through the bracket back here, and the bracket is closed up on the later car. '54, you can see it's just like the 53 up in here as far as the motor mount on the angle part, and no indentation here for the fuel pump area. This is a picture of a 54 bow tie car. That is an original rebound strap. You can see the bracket welded to the underside of the frame and the bracket for the bumper there. This is an original frame stencil on a 54. You can see the stones from the front tires have kind of got the paint chipped off in an angle there, but you can see most of the frame stencil really nice. Another shot of the frame. You can see the back end where there's no opening for the fuel lines and brake lines on the 54s. Also, 53 through 54, they had this loop over the drive shaft that bolted to the where the X member of the cross brace here was. And if you look underneath, you can see the bolt heads on them if you cannot see the loop on the cars, but they are on 53s through 55s. The 6-cylinder 53s, 54s, the battery tray was bolted to brackets which were welded to the frame. Later, when the 12-volt system come out, the battery tray changed a little bit and was welded right straight to the frame. It was not bolted on like this. And there's the fuel lines running down the inside frame of the 54. a frame stencil for a 55, and I flipped this over so it'd be a little easier for you to read. You can see it's pretty much the red color yet. Here's a 55. When they started the V8s, they moved the motor mounts up to the straight area here. You can see it's not on the angled area back here where it was for the 6 cylinders. You can see how they've kind of welded the bracket, and then the actual mount itself bolts to that bracket. Here you can kind of see the indentation they had to put in the frame to clear the fuel pump, and you can see the motor mount brackets up here in front of the fuel pump on the later cars. This is just a little better shot from underneath of the indentation around the fuel pump area. You can see it a little better in this picture. '55, when they come out with the manual transmissions, they had to add a bracket on there for the cross shaft for the clutch, and the back bracket is for a return spring back here. You can see the welds around these areas where they've welded it on. This was done at the factory. The C-1s only got this bracket if it was a manual transmission. This is in the AIM, and you'll notice it says arc weld, and it gives them a length to weld on each one of these, where to weld and how much to weld. And it does specify arc welding. Keep that in mind, because there's some other things on up the line here that makes me question why they specified arc welding on this. Here's a 56 frame stencil. In 56, they added a aluminum shim between the front cross member and the frame itself. It's right in here. And from what I'm gathering from this technical service bulletin, if you look up in this corner, up here around this area, it says subject instability above 60 mile an hour, Corvette's 1956 serials numbers listed. And it's got serial numbers listed right here as 3175 and 4156. And it's dated October 10th, 1956. So this is basically telling me that the early cars did not have that aluminum shim. They did not start until, I'm guessing, around 4156 from the factory. But if earlier ones got them, if the owner complained about it not driving well, then they put in these shims to kind of help out the steering or make it a little more stable. And here you can see the aluminum shims shine through there just a little bit on the inside of the frame rails there where they bolt up. 53 through 56, the rear spring hanger was more of a pear shape hanging down a little bit. 57, they moved it up and changed the dimensions of it. And also, if you look here, the brackets have changed a little bit too. This has got more of an added on feature, where this is more of a folded around type bracket on this. Also in 57, they added a second bumper, snubber, whatever you call it. So they've added another bracket. They've welded a second bracket on the side of the frame. And if you'll notice or if you look at the AIM, the top bracket has got a different number than the bottom, or the bumper has got a different number here than the bottom number. I imagine this one was a little longer than this one. Just another picture of the bumpers and the rebound strap. You can see this is a replacement rebound strap. It's a little different than the original one you've seen on the 54. The standard shock mount, there was a bracket or a piece welded up in the cross member right here for the standard shock mount on the 53s through 59s. If you got the heavy duty suspension, it said to remove that bracket from the standard shock mount and weld this one in place. So you've got a little different configuration on the heavy duty suspension than you do on the standard as far as that rear cross member over the rear axle. Also in 57, they changed the rear cross member. You can see in this one over here, there is 5 holes across the back. After VIN 2600, there's a hole here, 2 holes here, a hole here, 2 holes here, and a hole here. So there's 7 across the back. These 2 here in 58 and these 2 here got a weld nut on the inside, and they held a bracket for the rear bumpers. Why they started it this early in 57, I have no idea, but they did. So, but in 57, they did not have the weld nuts in them. Also, when they started stamping the VIN numbers on the frames in 54 on the side, a frequent number of them got a double stamp like this. As far as everything I've read, looked up, and found, there's no reason why they did the double stamp. Both stamps are quite legible, so whether the guy had a happy trigger finger when he was stamping it, I don't know, but there is a number of them with a double stamp on them. When they went to the 12-volt system, I told you the battery bracket change, or the battery mount itself. You can see here on the AIM, they got welds and stuff, and this time they're specifying gas welds. Why they specified arc weld on the clutch stuff and gas welds on the battery bracket, I don't know what the difference. I mean, it looks like they would be putting them on about the same spot in the factory, but that's what it specifies in the AIM. Here you can see a bracket welded to the frame, unlike the 6-cylinder brackets where they were bolted to brackets on the frame. At this point, Chris Sherman, are you on and watching? If you got anything you can add to this, speak up now. I don't know if Chris is on or not.
Yeah, I don't see a Chris Sherman in the list.
Okay.
But there is one question real quick regarding the 53 to 55s. You were showing some with the stencils. The date on there, is that the build date of the car or the date of the frame? And then the number underneath, is that a part number for the frame?
Yes, it's a build date of the frame at the, or when it was built at the factory at A.O. Smith, and that is I'm not sure if I think them are A.O. Smith part numbers. I don't think them are GM part numbers, because later on you get both of them. There is 2 different numbers. A.O. Smith's got a number, and GM has got a number. I gotta go back here and look and see if.
And then somebody else mentioned arc versus gas welding may have to do with the material thickness of why they specified one over the other.
That's kind of what I thought too, but I wasn't sure. Them numbers are A.O. Smith numbers there, I believe. Yeah, that's an A.O. Smith number across the bottom, and that's the date it was manufactured at the factory. Anything else on the C1s so far?
There is one question. I was trying to get clarification. They asked if the frames were skipped welded. I'm not quite sure what that means.
Yeah, they weren't solid welded across the top.
Oh, I got you. Okay, versus continuous. I got you. Yep.
Yeah, they were.
Yeah, stitch welding.
Wasn't solid, but you can see here in some later on where they drug the arc to kind of keep going. So yeah, they weren't a pretty weld by any means.
And is
The-
the C1
they-
stencil rolled or sprayed on?
They were rolled on as far as I know. I think all stencils were rolled on from what I understand. Okay. 58, we changed and put the fuel line back on the outside of the car, and the brake line still continued to run down the inside. Here's the AIM for the fuel line. 58 through 60, I believe, all ran the same way. So there should be holes on the side of the frame for these brackets to hold the fuel line down the side. In 59, we added the radius rods, and you can see here there's a bracket, extra bracket welded on the frame. And when we did this, there's a bracket welded on the rear axle that the rod actually went between here. And they had to move the bumper from the outside of the frame underneath the frame at this point in time, or it would interfere with that radius rod. Here you can kind of see the rod, how it's put on and how it's positioned on the car. Another picture of the brackets that were welded on for the radius rods, and you see the battery box welded on the front part. In 1960, we added a rear stabilizer, so we added another bracket to the frame back here to hold the rear stabilizer bar going across. Here you can see the bracket for the rear stabilizer bar, and you got a bracket here for the brake lines. You got a bracket here for the exhaust, and you got a bracket up here for the emergency brake. And here you can see in 60, they added, or they put the bracket like what was on the heavy duty suspension from the earlier cars. Now that was the standard mount for the shocks from 60 to 62. Also, the rear cross member, it's welded across the front side. The back side can be riveted and welded, or just riveted. Also, starting in 61, remember how in 58 this went kind of out and around this mount? Now they kind of bring it up and over, so you've got another another hole for a bracket on top of the frame back here now, and from 61, 62s. This is kind of an overview here of the front end section. You can see there's a bracket on both sides for brake lines, and a bracket added here for the brake line T to keep going to the rear suspension. And they've got holders here on the front cross member of where the brake lines come across. And here you can kind of see the weld. So what I was saying earlier about how he just kind of drug it across to keep the weld going. But yeah, they were just, it wasn't a solid weld at any time, no. That's pretty much for the C1s. Has anybody got anything they can add or know anything I said wrong? Please speak up. If you got any questions, holler now.
Slide 55, what's the yellow paint for? Inspection markings?
Yes.
Okay, anybody else? Feel free to type in a question or unmute yourself.
Speak up if you got anything you can add. I'm always ready to learn more.
My screen keeps flashing back and forth to an old slide to the new one.
Right now?
Yeah, it's stuck on the one with the bumper.
I'm guessing that could be just an internet connection issue on your end, possibly. It's not loading fast enough.
No, it's showing the cursor stuck on that slide, and anytime he clicks on it, it goes to the other one.
Huh. I'm on 56 where it just shows the frame and shows some welds across the top of the frame.
No, it's stuck on the one on the AIM with the two bumpers.
Huh.
It's stable.
History. I'm seeing it fine on mine.
Yeah, I think it's just your internet connect. You may want to try to log out completely and log back in, but it doesn't sound like there's much we can do if it's a connectivity issue. Another member had, let's see, any comment on the black finish of the frames, level of gloss, flat, etc.?
It was kind of a semi-gloss. It was kind of an asphalt-based paint type. It really wasn't a good quality type paint. It wasn't a gloss, but it wasn't a flat. I mean, it was kind of an in-between type, from what I understand anyway. Anybody else comment on that? Okay, well, we'll move on to the C2 stuff now. The C2 frames were all made at the Granite City, Illinois plant. And they moved it from Milwaukee down there. It was just not too far from the Corvette plant itself. This is just a drawing with all the measurements for the frame. You can see the back side of it. The rear width was 44.76. That will come into play here in an after bit when we get to the later C3 frames. The frame stencil was the right side toward the rear of the frame in white. You can kind of see the location in this this particular frame. They had slash marks for how many shims needed to go on each motor or body mount, and a lot of times they had a date hand wrote on the side of the frame. 50 or 63 through 66 across the front cross member, they had the brake lines come around this way, and there was one clip in the middle for the 63 through 66. First part of 66, later 66 had still used the single bracket in the middle, but there was also a couple extra added on. We'll get to that here after a bit. Here you can kind of see shim marks and the number of shims on top of the body mount bracket. C2s and actually C3s had the 4 holes in the bottom of the frame up here in this area around the steering. They were there for either the stabilizer type shock that kind of helped filter out some of the road tension up into the steering wheel, or they were there for the power steering bracket. They both used the same mounting holes up here, and actually this bracket for the power steering was used through all C2s, and all C3s had the same part number for this bracket. So the holes are all the same, clear through all the frames from 63 through 82. You can see here the motor mount bracket welded onto the frame. '63, this is a very early car. All 63, the parking brake system had a tab welded to the frame here where it pivoted. There's 2 holes going through the cross member here, going back with a cable to each rear tire. And if you'll notice this hole right here in the frame rail, that was just on very early 63s. I don't remember what the VIN number of this particular car was, but it was under 25. And it went away very early in the production. So I'm not sure whether that was some kind of a hole to help them get things aligned when they was first making the jig for the frames, or exactly what that was for. But it, like I said, it went away very early in the 63 production. Here you can kind of see the parking brake bracket and how the cables come through the cross member here. 63 had a unique bracket that mounted to the cross member for the exhaust system. Here you can kind of see how it was mounted to the brackets welded to the cross member. This also has the transmission bracket welded in the, or bolted in the same place here. The standard battery box was on the passenger side, and it was bolted on. You can't hardly see this picture here, but there's two bolts down here and there's bolts on the outside. The one on this side is for an air-conditioned car or a 396/65 car. The battery was mounted on the driver's side, and you can see it was bolted on the frame also. You can see the holes were there on both sides for the battery box. So if whichever way the car was made, the holes should be in the frame. If it's not a air-conditioned car, the hole should be just be opened up on the other side, and the battery should be on the standard side, vice versa. 63 and 64s all had an extra set of body mounts welded to the cross member in front of the differential. Also, 63 and most of 64 had no corner brackets here. You can see the bumper on the 63s and 64s was mounted on the outside of the frame back here. The body mounts are a little different on 63 and 64s. I will have a better picture to that here in a little bit. This is a rubber bumper for the rear axle, original one on the car. You can kind of see that it did have a part number molded onto the side of it. And you can kind of see the bracket welded to the frame a little bit there. Fuel lines on the 63s, 4s, and 5s run down the top of the frame rail, come up and went in the frame rail, and come out the frame rail at the back by the fuel tank. You can see the brackets holding them in place. You got a bracket clear back here at the back, and you got a bracket here on the side of the kick-up area. So there should be holes in them areas. So here you can see the extra body mount brackets. They also had this form piece riveted to the body, and your seat belts hooked into that. So actually these brackets was kind of holding the seat belt and a little bit of the body in this area. Late in 64, around VIN 1700, they added the cross or the angle brace at the back of the kick-up area. 64s was unique because it only had the little hole in here for the bolt to go through, unlike later ones where they had a bigger hole. You can see this, some slides here later on. 63 to 64, the 63 body mounts had a smaller hole because it did not have the rubber cushion between it. You can see the 64s had a much larger hole, and the rubber bushing kind of, or the rubber mount between the body and the frame went actually in there. Also, the height varied. The 63 was raised higher, the 64 was lowered for the rubber cushion to go in there. You can see the weld nut is busted off of this particular one. Early 64 cars could still have the holes in the cross member for the 63 parking brake cables. You can see this 64, the cable coming through and attached to the bracket that is welded inside here. for the 64 and later 65, 6 is parking brake system. There it shows the bracket for the parking brake on the cross member. Here's the bracket welded to the cross member for the parking brake, actually the lever in the center that the cable hooks to. '64 frame here, you can see the brake lines run over the top, the fuel lines run over the top. There is brackets to hold them. There should be screw holes in the top. The parking brake assembly here, there's a cable goes from each side to this back around. '64 and later exhaust pipe hanger that's in the center. You can kind of see it mounted here. It was a lot different than the '63s. You can see the transmission mount here, how it bolted up to the brackets welded right to the cross member. Starting in '64, if it was a convertible, they have welded this body mount in this position right here on. It says for the 467s only, arc welded on. It gives a position or the where to mount it or where it should be welded on at in the AIM here. You can see here, convertible frame, coupe frame. Frame stencil in '65. This is just a 2-liner. Very early cars could have had a 3-liner. Here's a 65 small block frame from the top. You can see here that the fuel line is still running over the top. Brake line is running over the top on this side. You can see the corner brackets here, the difference between the '64s where they just had a single hole. These have got a larger hole with a smaller, and all cross members in the C2s were welded in. Here's a big block '65 frame. You can see the fuel lines, brake lines are on top. Also, in the big block, you've got a rear stabilizer bar, so there is extra holes in the back with weld nuts on the inside of the frame to accept this. When they started the '65 big block, or actually when they started 65 frames, all the weld nuts were on all frames, whether it's a big block or small block, because you could not get inside the frame to weld them on after it was put together. You can see here the fuel line coming out the back too, real good on this. With the big block cars, it took an extra indentation in the front cross member to clear the harmonic balancer of the big blocks. You can see the difference here between the 63s, 4s. There's no indentation in this area where there is in the 65 and later cars. '65, they also started with the side pipe, so they added the keyhole slots in the side frames for mounting for the side pipes. You can see it mounted here or how it's used. Also in '65, we started with the disc brakes. With that happening, they had to put a little offset in the frame right here for the disc brake clearance, and also they had to move the bumper from the outside like they were on '63s, 4s, back up underneath the frame. Here you can see the big block rear stabilizer bar bolted on. You can see the shims were taped on with masking tape. Very good illustration of an original car right there. There's the weld nut inside the frame for the rear stabilizer bar. 66. This is a frame stencil. There's considerable variation of the frame stencils on the C2s here. You can see this one, the frame or the build date frame is across the top with dashes. This is the GM part number up here. This is the A.O. Smith part number down here. If you go to this one, you see the build dates down here. It's just, there's no set way of where they are. And in this particular 66, you can see instead of dashes, it's got dots. So there is quite a bit of irregularity in the frame stencil on the, I know the 66, 67, well, 65, 6s and 7s. 66, they moved the brake line and the fuel line from on top down along the side, and it went through the center cross member. And you can see here the holes for the brackets to hold them are on the side rather on the top like they were earlier cars. This is another picture here. This is a 63-4 type cross member where it welds to the frame, and you can see the 66, there's a big gap for the lines to go through. 66, this is just the cross member area. You can see the transmission bracket and the bracket for the exhaust system, how they're welded on just like they were in the earlier cars. The thing that changed on 66 was the way the 65, 6 and had a different bracket back here for the seat belts to anchor to. In 66, they also started putting holes in the cross member. There's a bracket here for the shifter to mount on. It does not mount on the transmission anymore. It mounts to this bracket that mounts bolts to the cross member. So there is extra holes in the cross member for this. This is the AIM showing the bracket for the shifter in 66. The mount for the seat belts in 65, 66, it had a single fold over. In 67, it's got a fold over at each end where the cable goes through to hook up to the brackets for the seat belt. 67 frame stencil. Still see the numbers even after it's been blasted on this one. 67, they also put the extra or two clamps or brackets for the brake line on the front cross member rather than the earlier ones had one in the center here. Late 66, there was holes for these two, but it was still mounted here. So I guess that it was kind of a running change at a lot of this stuff here through the years. 67 battery box, the way it holds the battery down was changed, but the battery box itself pretty much still the same, still bolts up to the frame as the earlier cars did. You can see here the difference between the earlier car bracket or the battery box mount, and you can see they're still, both of them are bolted back and basically in the same spot. So the bracket part of it did not change, or the holes in the frame did not change for that. 67, the center cross member got this bracket welded on for the emergency brake system. There's a pulley, seeing how they moved the emergency brake to the console up here, come back around this, and you can see the clip on the back, or the bracket on the back to hold the seat belts in that area there. Also in 67, from what I understand, this changed around December of 66. Early cars had a opening in the frame just behind the front A-arm, and the later cars was filled in. You can see the difference here. Also, the way the mounts for the cross member for the differential welded to the frame. You can see the earlier cars, it come underneath the frame and was welded up, where in 67, it went along the frame and was welded there instead of underneath it. Here you can see a replacement frame. The welds are a lot nicer on the replacement frames that you get to replace the original ones. But they are very nice frames as far as accuracy of way they're put together. They do have the original prints, from what I understand, up in Michigan, and are building them to the original prints. So they are dead nuts on as far, other than the welds are a lot nicer than the originals. Has anybody got anything or any questions for the C2 stuff, or anything they can add? Anything I said wrong, please speak up and tell me.
There's a couple chat questions. First one, on 65, you mentioned the big block had that cross member with the indentation. Was that only on big blocks, or were there ever small blocks to have that cross member?
No, every cross member was the same, big block, small block. They added it in there because at the time they built the frames, they did not know whether it was going to be a big block or small block. Just like the weld nuts in the back for the stabilizer bar, they were all put in there because they was no way of distinguishing big block frame from small block frame when it left A.O. Smith.
Okay. And then there was another question regarding 58s. If there's anything you could add to this, they had mentioned that in early 58, there was frame interference with the generator that required the frame to be smashed on the production line.
No, I can't add anything there. I'll have to do some more investigation on that.
Okay. And then slide 107, they had a question on.
Yes.
All right. So Chris, if you had a question, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I just wanted to grab a screenshot of that here quick, and my computer was still fighting me. Are these slides going to be available after the fact somehow?
Yeah, the recording will have both audio and video that you can download and save the entire presentation.
All right, thanks.
Yep, everybody will get a link for that. Let's see here. And then there's a question of the 2 ears on the center emergency brake cable. That was for all 67s. He has a mid-date 67, and it's only the single configuration.
Like this? As far as I know, I thought they were all like that. I don't, can anybody help out on that? Any other comments? That's pretty much the way I've seen, the majority of them I've seen, or all of them I've seen, guess look like this.
Or maybe was it, let's see. Yeah, he said emergency brake cable. Maybe was he talking about the tabs for the no.
Yeah, Nick, I'm talking about that tab in the back there. It's
This?
one big single tab, whereas you were saying it's two little tabs.
Oh, for the seatbelt bracket.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yes.
For the seatbelt bracket.
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah.
I'm sure they could have been some both ways. I don't know, but this is the majority of the way I've seen them is like this. But I have seen a 2 tab on some of the earlier cars too. But it's kind of, I don't know why they would have had 2 different tabs, but for the majority, this is the way I've seen them. Can anybody else add anything on that?
Yeah, this is Chris again. I was just looking at my frame. I've got 67 car number 183, so day 2 of production.
Yeah.
And mine looks like the photo on the left.
Like
Just
this one
a
over here,
single tab on it. In fact, it's
like
it's
this
a
one.
pretty wide tab. I suppose you're looking at it
Okay.
from the bottom there. Mine looks like the left-hand 65, 66 option.
Okay.
Yeah, mine's definitely wider than that too, and mine's 8,000 serial number, so it's like a January production car.
Okay.
So it's in between both of these.
Okay. I know this style here went on into the C3s too, so maybe it changed during the 67 model year, because I have seen 67s with this. I'm not sure what VIN numbers they were, though. I guess I didn't pay that much attention. Anybody else got any comments on that? Can help out?
Oh, this is Tom Dingman. 65 looks exactly like your picture. So maybe there were 3 different versions.
Could be.
And then Tom, you also had a question on slide 112 regarding the tape.
112.
Yeah. Bill Williamson, the late Bill Williamson, and I were both working on big block cars at the same time, and we both found tape wrapped around the rear cross member. It's to the very right of your picture number 112. And Bill thought maybe that was an indication of something special on the car, but I think they were just trying to hold the brake line, because the clips on the back side of that cross member where the brake line goes across
Yeah.
are really not that reliable. At least the reproductions aren't good. So my thought was that they probably just wanted to secure the brake line because the clips weren't working in the factory. But both cars that I'm talking about, we found this before the body was taken off, and nobody could have added it after production. They had to be wrapped around there before the body went on the first time.
So you're saying there was tape like wrapped around in here?
Exactly, on that side and on the other side as well.
Over here
Maybe,
too?
yeah, like 3 or 4 wraps around. It was black, almost like black duct tape, but a little bit thinner than that. I have
Okay.
pictures of what we found.
Okay. Anybody else?
Slide number 94.
I'm getting there. Yes.
Were all the key slots the same for the side exhaust?
Yes.
Okay.
From 65, they were all in every frame from 65 on through 82.
Hey, can I add something, Mike? Here it's kind of,
Yeah,
see
go
that,
ahead.
see that cut in the fiberglass where you can see a few strands sticking up? Looks like they have red overspray or something. Above the pipe, there's a curvature in the fiberglass.
Right here.
That is an indication of original side exhaust, which many people miss when they're trying to fake side exhaust. I think a lot of you guys probably know that.
Okay. Anything else?
If I can add something, that's why side exhausts are only St. Louis cars, because A.O. Smith didn't have the jig to cut that out.
This area in here.
Yes.
Okay.
Hey, Mike, you mentioned up to 82, they had that slot for side exhaust. So they, even though the last few years did not have a side exhaust option, they still had that slot.
They still had the slot because in the C3, 69 was the only year you could get a side exhaust, but they never took the slot. I mean, the slot was there clear up through 82. Yes.
That's interesting, because when GM was still selling frames back around 95, I bought a frame from GM for a C3 and it did not have that slot. It just had a round bolt hole.
Huh.
But again, that's, 10 plus years after production ended.
Yeah.
Nick, was that supposed to be a C2 replacement part?
It was a replacement for a C3. It was meant to be an 82 frame. They were still selling them in the mid 90s from GM.
Interesting.
All right. I don't see any more questions.
Any other comments? Okay, we'll move on to the C3 stuff then. Okay, here you can see this is a C3 frame, and you can see how it tapers up in the back. This is a C2 frame, and you can see how it tapers down. I've had some people suggest that early 68s could have been leftover 67 frames. I really doubt that, because the C3 starting at 68, the frame width across the back shrunk by an inch. And like I said before, the 2s went down, the 3s went up. So if you was going to put a C2 frame under a C3, you would have to do considerable modification to the back to get the body to mount right on it. So I'm fairly sure that they did not use a C2 frame under a C3 at all. See, here's the dimensions for the C3, starting in the 68 early cars. Sometime in 68, the A.O. Smith plant, this is a frame stencil here, but in 67, December of 67, a strike at the Granite City plant of A.O. Smith forced them to move production back to Milwaukee, and the stencils changed. I don't know at that time, because you can see this one, the A.O. Smith number, and here they had both numbers, the A.O. Smith and the GM number on this particular frame here. This particular frame, they just had the one number, and then the date was put on. So I'm not sure if that kind of happened at the same time, or why for sure they changed. But like I said, the frame stencil seems to be kind of a mysterious thing, because there was so many variations in the way it was put on there. I think it's the way the guy felt it was stamping it out that day. The early 68s had no cross brace, or had no brace on the kick-up area back down to the member going across in front of the differential. Here's a 68, early 68 frame. You can see it don't have the braces in this area here. Then May or June, they said they added these braces for the back end. I don't know what the reasoning was for it. Just a little extra support for the rear part of the frame. In the C2s, all manual transmission cross members were welded in on the cars up to about 1980. All automatics were bolted in. You can see the bolt area here where it's be taken out. The turbo hydromatic was a little more heavy and awkward than the power glides were. So they had to make it so they could remove that frame to get them in and out. The exhaust hanger changed a little bit in the C3 era. The bracket for the shifter also changed a little bit from the 66, 67. It was a little different than the earlier cars, bolted to the cross member for the manuals. This is a 69 automatic frame. You can see the bracketing back in here for the shocks and the bumpers underneath the frame here, real good on this particular one. Here's a 69 manual transmission. You can see it's welded in. Basically everything else is the same. You can see the cross braces, how they're welded on pretty nice on this particular picture. It was all like that from when they started in 65 to the end. You can also see some of the other brackets for the emergency brake stuff and so forth on this. Pretty nice. This is a 69 frame. You can see the offset for the disc brake area back in here. Started back in 65. Real nice on this picture. You can see where the frame stamping is on this particular picture too, right in this area. They moved back there in the C-3s. Center cross section area on a 69. You can see brackets welded on here for heat shields underneath the floor pans of the passenger compartment. You can also see the bracket changed a little bit here from the 67s for the emergency brake setup. Routing of the fuel lines. And the routing of the brake lines. You can see there's extra holes back in here for brackets and brackets for the fittings themselves to fasten to. In late 69, they added a hole in the frame where the trailing arm comes through for a cotter pin to go through to hold the shims in. That started sometime in mid 71, putting the cotter pin through. Why they started putting the hole in 69, I don't know, and didn't put the cotter pin in till later in 71. Here you can kind of see the frame. You can kind of see the where the cotter pin area was over here for the shims and the trailing arm hanging out. The brackets for the shock and the rubber bumper underneath on this one real good. Gary Bosselman, can you add anything to this? Are you on? Gary must not be with us.
He's on, and it showed his microphone should be live right now.
Gary, can you add anything?
He may be trying to talk, but we can't hear him.
Okay, we'll go on. Maybe
there is one other quick question while we paused regarding the VIN stampings on the frame. The second one towards the rear of the body. Did you ever see that it was stamped by hand if the machine was not working?
I don't know. I'm sure they probably could have. I haven't seen one hand stamped, but that's not saying that, you know, it didn't happen. What else have we got? Anything before we go on a little farther?
And Gary just sent a chat message. He said he doesn't see anything.
Okay. Also in C3 era, instead of putting slashes on like they did in the C2 for the number of frame shims that was supposed to be used, they marked them out with a number. And you can see in 73, the frame stencil moved up behind the passenger side front tire on the area where it's bent in to go for the front suspension up in there. 73, we got the regulations for the 5-mile-an-hour bumper. So they all this was bolted to the front of the frame up in here. They had O-mark bolts is what these are called up here. I got a better picture of them here coming up. They were made to basically, this rod here, there was like what they called a die that was welded to the frame. And as the bumper, or as it got hit and pushed this area back, this more or less sheared the metal off of this rod coming back. Well, once this was hit, this was no longer functional anymore. It needed to be replaced to still have the 5-mile-an-hour protection up in here. A lot of people didn't realize this and got hit again and did way more damage than the first time because of that particular problem. If you are judging a car, and you can actually see this every once in a while, if this particular area looks kind of funny, chances are it's been hit and it was not replaced right. 74 frame, they made them go to the back with the 5-mile-an-hour bumper, so they had to add pieces on the back, and they used them O-mark bolts on the back area also. That basically is kind of the same principle the way they worked on the front. Just the area was had to be reworked a little bit to make them work on the back. From 75, they went to the hydraulic pieces on the back rather than the O-mark bolts. And when they did that, they frame widened out quite a bit, and the rear cross member coming across was changed considerably. You can see the difference in the two different frames right here as far as width-wise and so forth. There's all the measurements for the 75. Also in 75, we got the catalytic converter. So we added brackets for a shield to go over the catalytic converter so it didn't put so much heat back up in the compartment of the interior, where your interior compartment, and also the front bumper area was the brackets was changed quite a bit from what they were in 73-4. '75 to '77 frames are pretty much basically the same, not much variance in them. There's the hydraulic bumper cushion on the back, how they're bolted in. You can see that there was a caution label on there that actually survived pretty good for the rest of what the rest of the frame looks like on this. The transmission mount was bolted on the cross member. You can see the bracket for the emergency brake was still like it was in the earlier cars, but the bracket from the C2 era cars had changed considerably here for the C3s. You can see the cross member bolted into the side frame here on this. You can also see a bracket that holds the lines. There should be holes in the frame for them brackets right from the factory. The exhaust pipe hanger when they went to the single exhaust rather than having the two pipes come back, the bracket for the exhaust changed a little bit here. You can see it's a lot different than when they had the pipe coming back on each side, just going off to the one side. When they added a catalytic converter, This bracket was bolted to the cross member at the front edge of the catalytic converter. And you can see here the shield for the catalytic converter. It bolts to the back frame right in here and over on this side, and to the front frame up on this area up in here. So there should be extra holes. If you see holes back in here on earlier frames in 75, you'll know it's a wrong frame because they didn't have the holes for the shield in the earlier cars. And there's just the shield. You can see the bolt holes where the anchors to the frame. 75 to 77 frame versus 78, 79. You can see they changed the rear end, or the rear width of the cross member. You can see on both of these how they had to make the frame bulge out at the back to accommodate the hydraulic bumpers, or the shock absorber bumper type area back in here. '78 and '82 frames. This shows all the dimensions of there. 79, 78, 79. Front bumper area, 78. '78, earlier cars had dots where the later ones had dashes between the frame stencil in this area right in here. Starting in 80, we changed the mount for the differential. Went to this aluminum triangular shape with the holes in it to reduce the weight. This particular car had the single leaf spring, which becomes standard in 81. '82 frame specs. You can see the cross member was gone, and there's just brackets for that triangular aluminum piece to fold up to. There's just a picture of the frame. You can see the brackets for the aluminum piece, the aluminum cross member that bolts in right in that area. Front bumper extension changed a little bit. The later cars, from having the one bigger piece in the middle, it's kind of got more of a triangular shape, and the cushioning, more of the cushioning was in the actually the bumper area than the frame part itself. Cross member for 80, 80 to 82, all of them bolted in. They were not welded in anymore. You can see the bracket for the transmission was welded on, kind of a all of one with the bracket here for the parking brake area, kind of molded right into the transmission bracket itself. Starting in 80, manual transmission tower for the or the clutch bracket, or the cross bracket for the clutch shaft was bolted on rather than welded on the frame. You can see the holes for the mounting for that in this area right in here. There's a good picture of the aluminum cross member for the differential. An 81 frame. And there's an 82 frame stencil. You can see they got dashes rather than the dots like earlier. It's another picture of the rear end mount. This particular one still had the multi-leaf spring across the back rather than this was probably an 80. I don't remember whether the manuals had this. I think the manuals still had this spring, and the automatics had the one-piece fiberglass spring. Maybe somebody can jump in and tell me on that one if I'm right there. I think that's the way it was.
Yeah, I just want to add in real quick. The 81 was the first year they introduced the fiberglass monoleaf, and that was only for automatics. In 82, since there were no manuals, all 82s had fiberglass.
Yes. Okay. This was actually, I don't know where I got this, but I found out that this was the machine used to set the rivets. And this was a later C-3 frame. You can see the frame stencil machine here, or how they put the VIN number on with the frame. That's pretty much all I've got. If anybody else has got any comments or can add anything or tell me anything I said wrong, speak up.
Hey, Nick, I just have a general question that was covered way back when. You mentioned, I believe it was sometime in the 80s that you bought a frame for which year, I don't remember, but from GM. Do you recall about what that frame cost from GM back then?
It was for an 80 to 82 replacement, and there was a 94, I think we bought it. I'm trying to think. I think I was about $800, if I remember right.
Oh my God. Yeah. Wow. Oh, thanks, Nick. Just curious.
No problem. And if there's any chat questions that I have missed, if you want, you can unmute yourself and chime in, or if you've got any other questions, now's the time.
So, Mike, Jim Williams here. Great presentation. Just wanted to make sure on the 73, when the stencil moved forward on the application, I have very early 72, and the stencil was in the same location underneath the passenger side battery area. So,
I think that moved up there sometime in 71, if I remember right, late part of 71. Anybody else got any comments or anything they'd like to bring up?
Yeah, Mike, Chris Enstrom here again on the 74s, I think, or maybe 3s when they had the 5-mile-an-hour bumper. 74s, you showed a really nice photo of the rear frame section. I'm just curious about the shock itself. That doesn't look like a standard suspension shock. It looks like something else.
This here?
This maybe another slide or
the 75, starting in 75, I think, Mike.
Yeah, one go backwards, maybe a couple more. Yeah, right there.
Okay,
that was not look like a standard shock. Go ahead.
That was underneath a 75 car that I got that was wrecked. And as far as I don't know, that's what was there. So and it didn't look like it had been taken off.
Yeah. So that was on 74 and 5 only, you think?
This was 75. 74, they still had the Omar bolts like this right here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
There was no shock or no shock absorber style on 74s. It was that Omar bolt, kind of where it sheared the metal off of the rod coming through.
Gotcha. Very good. Thank you.
This is Mike Eichler. My 75 shock looks just like what you got in the picture.
Okay. Okay. I would say that was 75, and that's what was there when I tore the car apart, because it was totaled when I got it. Anybody else got anything? If not,
this is Tom Ding, Mike.
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
There's a bunch of comments thanking you, and they're all well deserved. but I think we missed a comment by Brad Hillhouse. It says, I believe a 82 Corvette, if it had FE7 Gymkhana suspension, there was a steel rear leaf in 82.
Okay,
Exception to the fiberglass comment.
okay.
If that's already been discussed, I'm sorry I brought it up. Thanks again, bud.
No problem. I appreciate everybody signing up, and I hope everybody got a little bit out of this and enjoyed it, and we'll see what happens. If I can get another one around, I will.
Nice job, Mike.
Thank you.
Very much appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Thanks
Thank you.
again, Mike.
Thank you, Mark.